And that should make us live, everybody. So welcome to the Dev Talk Show in December 5th of 2023. I'm here with Rich Ross. How are you doing, Rich?
Doing well, Chris. I think feeling better. I think we're all kind of in that recovery mode, having caught something with the family getting together over the holidays.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why we've taken some time away to kind of get ourselves right, and it's been busy. I think people want to get stuff done before the end of the year. So
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks. That's true. And then at the same time, I definitely was down last week to where I could not talk for long stretches without really getting into this huge coughing fit. And still kind of recovering from that a little bit.
which kind
So
of makes it hard to do what we're doing.
yeah, it kind of makes it hard to talk to everybody. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you are having a great Tuesday. I almost said it was Monday. That's terrible that I was even going back a day. We, in some earlier shows, we took a look at the Blazor identity platform, and I think we might have been in RC2, I think. And there were some known bugs at the time, so we struggled a little bit to kind of even. I think we actually did struggle through it and got a login page working. But what we want to do now is we eventually want to add authentication and authorization to the Dev Talk Show website and allow ourselves to log in and maybe have some administrative features that we really haven't really dreamed up yet. But part of the purpose of that site is to let us have a place to use these technologies too. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, I suppose. But we there are some really interesting things, in my opinion, about Blazor authentication and authorization beginning in .NET 8. I think we're going to recap those, and then we are going to take a look at what it's like to using the template, set it up, what's the code you get, dive into that code a little bit. But there's no doubt that today is not going to be a tutorial from beginning to end. There's too much to look at and explore. So I think in a future show, we will be closer to, hey, everyone, here's a complete begin to end pattern of how you might do this. Because it turns out there's a lot of things you can do, but there's some special things you have to know about Blazor.
Yeah.
The idea of being in a Blazor component instead of if you're in Razor Pages or MVC, the whole page is kind of delivered. That's kind of your delivery. And so traditionally in ASP.NET Core, we've had like HTTP context that you could look at. And you kind of have that, but also imagine now, instead of writing a controller with a view, and the view, yes, you might have partial views and you might have some nested stuff, but in the end, there's a view, and that view is the page, and you do your HTTP context stuff in there. Or in Razor Pages, you're going to do it in the Razor page. In Blazor, your page is a component itself. Everything's a component.
Right. Yeah.
So it changes the dynamic a little bit, because in .NET 7, we even explored this ourselves. In .NET 7, when you add identity to a Blazor project, you don't get routed Blazor components. You get Razor Pages.
Okay.
It gets added to your project as a set of Razor Pages. And then basically what happens is you're kind of moving back and forth between both worlds, if you choose to do it that way. And what I mean by that is that ASP.NET Core is far more flexible than the templates really show us. If I want to have an MVC app and I want to have Blazor components in it, that works. If I want to have a Razor Pages app and I want to have Blazor components in the Razor Pages, that works. If I want to have some controllers and some Razor Pages and some routed Blazor components that are like pages, and then I want to have components in all three of those, I could make that work. Yeah. I just don't know that a lot of us do, except for those of you watching that are saying, but at work, we kind of did that stuff because we've been on the journey from the beginning. That I could see.
Sure.
If you said like, hey, we were on the journey back in ASP.NET MVC .NET Framework days, So when we moved to core, we were able to move our code over relatively easy. It wasn't just recompile. It was like, okay, controllers are slightly different. Hold on, we can copy this code. We can copy this code. Then Razor Pages comes out, and maybe you really like it, and so you say, okay, well, we'll do a couple Razor Pages. Then Blazor comes out. So I can see how, like, in an enterprise, you might have, the I don't want to call it legacy. It's the working code, is what it is.
Yeah.
The working code.
Yeah, I mean, you're assembling what you need from the parts that make sense at the time, right? So you've got stuff that, hey, that code just works. We're just going to bring that along. But I want to take advantage of this new thing here. So yeah, it almost becomes, it's not. The term that I can't get out of my head is that, the Frankenstein monster, right? You've assembled all these pieces, and it's really not that bad, right? You don't want to say that because it's like you said, it's good code, but
it's working code. And so you run into this more at work than you do at home, mainly because at home we have the luxury of just file new project. Maybe our project's small enough that we just move stuff over. But if you're small enough in what you're doing, the flip side is that you just don't move. And so that's a show we definitely want to do in the future of, like, hey, I'm still on web forms.
I'm stuck. What do I do?
And it happens. This is real. There's more people in that space than anyone really knows, even though we roll our eyes and we go, oh my gosh. There are more projects in that space than I think anybody realizes.
Yeah. And that's why it still has support. So
yeah. Right. So let me see if I can get our overlay up here and move us over. And then I have to present my screen. So that's going. So hopefully everybody, if you were in the US, hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving holiday. And even if you're not, then it's winter where we are in the Northern Hemisphere. And boy, wouldn't it be cool if someone in the Southern Hemisphere was watching? That would just be cool in general. And summer over there, right? So
yeah,
I have Visual Studio 2022 open. And what I want to do is very quickly, you do not have to use Visual Studio for this, by the way. For anybody watching that isn't super familiar with, maybe you're not familiar with Visual Studio. Maybe you just like using Linux. You're on your Mac. You just like VS Code. I like doing .NET List SDKs to see what I've got. And let me make this bigger so that everyone can see it. I've got a lot of SDKs on this machine, some of which I probably need to remove, some of these older ones. We always talk about how one of these days we'll use the .NET uninstall tool. But what I do have is 8.0.100, which I believe is still the latest. I don't think there's been any kind of security patch. So 8.0.100 is here, which means if you've got that far, you could even say .NET new list. And we've got all kinds of different projects we can start with in here. Some of these I've added myself. I don't believe, these are not in the, these don't come with the SDK, but they were added because I installed these templates from the Duende website. And then I think the other day we were doing BUnit, right? So we installed this template. So that's great that this is extensible. But the one I want is right here, Blazor web app. So I could say, let's make a new directory. The easiest way to do this is make a new directory. And today I think it's just going to be, it's not going to have I don't plan on keeping this.
Right.
So we're just going to call it Blazor Identity Demo. Those are famous last words. I try to use things like Blazor Identity Demo, Blazor Identity Test, so that later when I'm looking in my massive source folder, I feel safe to delete it. And then you know what actually happens? I worry that I really need this. So I don't know how to get out of that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you almost need to include, I don't need this in the name.
So if I say .NET new Blazor help, what I'm going to get is these options very much mirror what you see in Visual Studio.
Yep.
You could pick your framework if you want. If you don't, you're going to start with .NET 8 because that's the latest installed on this machine. That's the general reason why that happens. What we get in Blazor now is we get the choice between whether we want authentication, individual authentication, or individual accounts, or no, don't put authentication into the app. That you can always add it later. But if you do individual, what you get, kind of in my opinion, is you sort of get a working demonstration, but it is kind of a demonstration of how you can do this with components. It does look like code that you can lift. So
okay,
when you are in, you could, if you have SQL Server installed, it's going to use local DB. In fact, I think it does that even if you don't have SQL Server installed on Windows and in Visual Studio. The default here, that's kind of interesting, is the default is false to use local DB when you say .NET New. Instead, they use SQLite.
Okay.
I think the reason for this is because more people using .NET New, in fact, it's the only way if you are on a Mac or Linux. So therefore, it is more likely. It's actually not that it's more likely. Plenty of people on Windows do .NET New.
Right.
But if your only option is .NET New because you're Mac or Linux, you can't use SQL Server easily, or more accurately, you can't use local DB. Like, it's just not there. It's just not ready to go like it is in Visual Studio. So therefore, file-based SQLite, it's going to work. It's the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It's a common denominator across the wall, right?
Yeah. So even here on Windows, it's going to be local DB. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It's going to be SQLite when using this from the command line. Not that you can't use SQL Server because we have it in a container now. You could use it however you want. You can say .NET New Blazor, and then you could say they're saying that the default is that they don't add all of the what you're going to see is all the different components. And so you say auth. I could also say AU, and then I could say individual. And perhaps I would leave the SQLite stuff just as it is. And then I would decide whether or not I want the sample pages. They in the .NET command line, the default is false. So I could run it from here, and that would be a way to get started. And I think in a future episode, we'll do this all from Linux.
Yeah.
Just so we can see that. But today I'm going to start in Visual Studio.
Okay.
And the template that we want is Blazor Web App. I know there's a lot of other templates, but we want Blazor Web App, which is the modern Blazor template that supports server-side rendering, but it also supports interactivity. And that interactivity is either with what we would call Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. So Blazor App 1 is probably okay. I don't necessarily want to put it there. I don't know if I already have a Blazor App 1. I guess we're about to find out. It'll probably yell at me if I do. No, it didn't yell at me. Okay. And then on this screen here, we have some choices. Since we're interested in .NET 8, we're going to stay there. Mm-hmm. Authentication type, I'm going to change to individual. So let's do that. And now I'm going to go ahead and include the sample pages, and we will say interactivity is, let's say it's global. I'm trying to decide here what we should put for render mode. I mean, I suppose we could do auto, and then we would see it all.
Is that going to make it too complex to understand what's going on if we do that?
Well, I think the first pass through, what it'll show us is everything.
Okay.
And then I do kind of want to back out, because what I think is interesting is setting these options where you get very little. And to just look at that difference was actually kind of interesting to me. I thought it was a little illuminating. So
yeah. Okay.
So it's going to create. And then you say you get a solution explorer. And here is what the world looks like if you say you want auto, interactive auto mode, which means this is what we used to call, what was called for a little while, it was called Blazor United, but it was the code. I don't want to call code name, but it was what they were trying to get across, the idea that your components that you want to be able to have Blazor choose the render mode on the fly, they have to be in this client project. That's the first thing. So it's not that you can't have server only components. It's not that you can't have Blazor server only components. And it's not that you can't have components that are server side rendered only, and they can live up in the other project. Somebody came to the door.
Oh no.
Are you going to be good? My dog says, well, I got to go see who it is. I think he still has to go see who it is.
No worries.
He'll figure it out. Now, nobody actually rang the doorbell, but they said he can hear the little motion alarm.
Okay.
And so he's like, I got to go see. And then my door was closed. So now he's on his way. So, okay. So let's see what happens. Let's run this real quick. This might feel a little bit like a getting started with Blazor thing, but we're going to move into identity as quickly as we can.
Mm-hmm.
So if you run this, what did we do? We selected individual accounts. We want the sample pages, and we wanted interactive auto. Kind of like we're saying we want it all. Pages up. And that's interesting. The browser chose like a funny profile. And I think we've looked at this several times before.
Mm-hmm.
This hello world.
Yeah.
Where the counter is not an authenticated page, so I can use it. And the weather is not an authenticated page, so I can use it. But this page, auth required, you have to be authorized to use it.
Okay.
So when you click on it, it redirects you, and we even saw it happen, redirects you to login. If I go back to weather and we look up here, we've got our weather URL. When I switch to auth required, it's trying to go to a component called auth, but it doesn't. Instead, you get redirected.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so it's, the components are doing that for us. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, spot on. So it's components here. This is similar behavior to when we had authentication in MVC, right? You would have a control method that would get a declaration around it saying you need to be authenticated. And if you ever hit that, you got to go to the auth page first if you didn't have a token or whatever it was looking for.
Right. And what's interesting to me is that it turns out that ASP.NET Identity, and I'm pretty sure about this even still in .NET 8, because like I said, this is going to be something we build through, has some defaults already in place so that if you route pages that are account/login or account/log off or log out, I can't remember which one it is, then you don't have to configure anything. Whenever the code says I need to log out now, it just automatically routes there. But what a lot of people may or may not know is that you can configure all of that. You could say, I don't want it to be /account/login. I want it to be /eat at Joe's. Well, fine. If that's what you really want, you can configure that in your program CS or wherever you want to. It's the options pattern that we use all throughout program CS. And if you've done Blazor before in .NET 7, you might look at this and say, I've seen this before. I've already done this. This is no big deal. In fact, in order for me to start to customize the pages, what I have to do is I have to come over here and I have to scaffold those pages. And that's where I go, no, that was .NET 7. In a Blazor app in .NET 7, identity was still done by Razor pages, which is one of the exclusive server-side frameworks. There's no Blazor or anything. So your identity was being handled 100% server-side. Here, instead, identity is living, and this is because we chose the interactive auto. I want to be clear. Identity is living here. It's living in the server app. And now that makes the server project. I shouldn't have said app. It's living in what we kind of know of as the server project under components, under account. And then here are some components, but then here are some other components. Well, I'm sorry. I take it back. Here are some support C# files, and we're going to look through some of those today, and then we're going to have to look through some of those another time.
Okay.
Here are some shared components that are used in the pages. You actually end up getting a lot of code kind of dumped on you. And this is your code, frankly. Like, I mean, we could say, well, Microsoft did all this. Sure, but who owns it now?
Right.
It's yours now. So login.razor is what we got moved to, we got switched to, and this will look familiar. It's saying use a local account to log in. Here's the input and form fields for the email, the password, and whether you want to be remembered. And then there's a link to head. Maybe I don't remember my password. Okay, well, I've got a routable page for you ready to go. We can head over there if that's what you need. And if you haven't registered in our SQL Server, our local DB or our SQLite database, then we have a way to get over to registration. And finally, because this happens to me a lot, I don't know if this happens to you a lot, Rich, is I sign up for something and I think this is partially because it's the first contact, the email never gets to me.
Yeah.
This happens to me a lot. And I think there are some junk filters in all the major web email providers these days that are saying, hold on, you don't get email from this group ever.
Right.
And they're asking you to click a link. I don't know.
Sounds funny.
Yeah. So then I often have to come back and say resend email. And I think what happens on the second email is they're like, well, okay, maybe they might even be aware of the resend of this problem. So they're like, well, okay, we'll let it through this time. And if they call it junk, then we're really going to be on top of it. So the other thing that you don't see here, and actually I should probably run the app so that we can compare, is we're going to see this code, but it's not going to be like sitting here in this page. When I go to login, I think we could kind of, if we all squinted, we could see this left side of the page.
Right.
But they use another service to log in with external authentication. Like, where's this stuff? And I'm going to go back to the code now so we can see.
Yep.
That isn't here. Now we're in the code block. But there is something that is here. This external login picker.
Okay. So a component, right?
A component, yeah. So use another service to log in. We saw that. That's right here. But we have an external login picker. And here's what's nice. If that concerns you because you say, oh, great, how am I going to customize the external login picker? Well, you can. It's because in that shared folder that I talked about earlier, here's where we're going to find those components that they're doing a little bit of extra work, but they're not the routable, like login is routable, lockout is routable. All of these things up here, these are all routable, all the pages for you to confirm your email, to confirm your email changed, logging in from an external source, everything, all of this stuff. These are routed pages. And then we have even more in the manage section, because now I'm a user and I want to manage my accounts. Maybe I want to link new external accounts. Maybe I want to change some of my personal data. I want to change my password. I want to set up two-factor authentication. We have samples for all of this now. So there is a lot to dig through. This is not an hour.
No. And well, two things there. Doing authentication, there's a lot of things to think about when you're saying, hey, I want someone to sign into my site, right?
Yeah.
And some of that you have to control if you're going to roll, this individual identity. You've got to take some responsibility for that. If you start using external identity providers like, Microsoft account, Google account, whatever it is, then some of those things won't be needed because changing your password is over there. Changing your email is over there. Right.
Yeah.
So but we don't know. So when you say, hey, we want to include individual identity, okay, here's everything you might need. And then you can back off from that. Other thing if you were to go back to that control, the external,
I haven't even opened it yet.
Oh, okay. When you, that was kind of where I was going. So
yeah,
it's kind of, I was wondering if you go back to the original page, if you just hit the F12, will you get there? Right? You should be able to.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're
In the
talking
code.
about, we're here in the code. Yeah. So let's
just because you're going through,
right.
it's in this place in the share. Like,
yep,
I won't
you're
remember
right.
that. But you see the control, you can always hit F12 and get there.
I agree with you. So you figure that login, it would be easy for, I would like to think, if you have a little familiarity with Blazor, that you can at least kind of I mean, this is what I did. I stumbled my way to pages, account pages, login. Okay, let's start looking at the code. And then, yes, when I get to external login picker, and I'm just going to go ahead and F12 it, then here I am in external login picker.razor. I don't know, just in case people don't know, this is one of my favorite buttons in the IDE, this one right here, sync with active document. Because then when I click it, it shows me, oh, I see, it's down here.
Yep.
So it's one of my.
That's a nice new recent addition.
Yeah, I mean, it's been there a while. I've used it a long time. But the point is I don't know how long. A while. So in any case, the other thing about opening this tab is Visual Studio has opened it on the right, not on the left.
Right.
It calls this a preview window.
Okay.
So if I continue to start, like, let's say I go ahead and pick application user, which happens to be code in our app that was generated for us. Oh, wait, what happened to external login picker? Because this is it's previewing along. If you go back many moons in Visual Studio, it would have opened tab after tab after tab. And after you start going down an F12 rabbit hole, you'll look up and you'll go, ah! So now it's a little bit of like, well, let me open it here. And I'm going to use the back button, like whoever uses the back button in Visual Studio. But that takes me back to external login picker. If I click on this thing here, this little thing, it's there. It looks like it's trying to make you feel like it's opening a screen. Keep tab open is what it's called. Then fine. Now you've been promoted. So this message might look familiar. There are no external authentication services configured. That's interesting. Like, how does it know?
Right.
How does it know? Because here's the rest of that form. And so what they're saying is that if we configure an external login source, it's going to detect that. And it's going to say, oh, okay, well, you actually want to show each of the providers then.
Right.
Which I think, like, well, that's kind of cool. And how does it figure that stuff out? Well, we look at the code. One of the things that you might have started noticing on these pages is these pages have more. These aren't the only two managers, but they have these managers injected in them: the sign-in manager, the identity redirect manager. So these things are around to help us. Since we're components, we inject this into the component, and now we're starting to get functionality that we only got at the page level back in Razor Pages or MVC. We can sign users in and out based on their identity. We can redirect them somewhere. There's a couple others too. There's a navigation one that lets us move to a different identity component. So now the interesting thing is, well, what if I F12 on Sign In Manager? And here's where I end up in, here's where I am not in code for my project anymore. Now I'm in ASP.NET Core Identity 8.0. I'm getting a hint of that up here. It's the kind of thing where if you didn't know, or maybe you hadn't experienced this enough, you wouldn't just look at this and recognize it and say like, oh, this isn't my code anymore. Now I'm in the .NET source. And so that's I kind of wanted to show you that here are the signs, how you know you're in the .NET source. For one thing, I'm in ASP.NET Core Identity as a namespace. Well, that's not my project.
Yeah.
The link that you're going to is they basically downloaded the source on the fly and thrown it in a temp space in your app data source server section, where that's where they're throwing this source. These are hints that let you know, like, hey, you're not in Kansas anymore. This is now you're in ASP.NET Core. The sign-in manager, it has access to the HTTP context. And here is where it can start to figure things out. In fact, it tells you things. If you look through this long enough, you will find the code that basically says, okay, here's how they know how many providers you've configured, because they know that we haven't configured any.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. I think you can come here. And again, sign-in manager, get external authentication schemes. So this is, again, this is something in .NET. This is not our code, ASP.NET Core Identity. But they have an extension method that says, actually, is this an extension method? No, this is not an extension method. Get external authentication schemes. And they basically look through and they say, are there any external schemes? No? Well, then that's how the external login picker knows what to display. So
cool.
This is an interesting case of when you're working on this, none of this kind of feels like your code because this was generated for us.
Mm-hmm.
But this is your code. And you actually might find yourself heading out to the ASP.NET source code to know what happens next.
Right.
That's what I did.
And yeah, I mean, that's that compiled code that you basically have as part of your project. That's common, being able to dive into that, right? Dive into to the point that you can see it, but not necessarily change it, although you potentially could extend it, right? If you had a use case where that is. Or because it's all open source, you could go that route and say, hey, this really should be a change or a feature, and go down that path. But for the most part, you're just seeing how it runs. And that can help you in understanding, well, what do I got to do in my code to work better with that?
Yeah. So let's say you aren't in Visual Studio.
Okay.
We do have source.net, which is only mildly entertaining to say. And I can come here and I can type sign-in manager. I can actually type much deeper than that. I can put the method name in. But if I say sign-in manager, then here is the sign-in manager. And I can click on it. And what's nice is that, it's also telling me that, hey, do you want the file? Do you want the class? Do you want a property called sign-in manager that's being used somewhere else? So now once again, we're talking about, I can look through the code. Again, we're same place that we were before. Let's see, I want to find something to click on here that's kind of interesting. Like sign-in manager uses HTTP context, and you might have noticed that my pointer changed to a finger. When I click on that, now I'm in HTTP. So I'm able to browse the ASP.NET source code.
Nice.
Make this bigger. I didn't realize, I forgot that it wasn't bigger. So I'm back at sign-in manager and I say HTTP context, and now I'm in HTTP context and I can browse this source code.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
The other thing that you could do is you could just go get the source code, which is, this is it. This is ASP.NET Core. I checked it out from GitHub right at 8:00. That tag that is supposed to be what was released. Now, when you work with the ASP.NET source code, there's two ways to work with it. One is you can just get it all and you can open the solution at the root. You got to wait. If your computer's a little slow on I/O or maybe doesn't have the fastest processor, it's going to take a little while. But in order to work on this code, we've even done a show on this in the past. In order to work on this code, there's more setup to do. But if you just want to look at it, then you can do that. But now here's the problem, though. Where is it? So for me, the answer is there's a couple ways to figure out where it is. I actually like this way to figure out where it is, is to say, okay, well, where is identity exactly? Oh, I see. Identity is in source, identity core. Then it's under identity CS proj. Okay, so maybe I can go find it now. And I go, watch, let's hope that this works out for me. So I say, it was source, then identity, then core. Here's the project. And so now here I am in the project. And what was I looking for specifically? I'm looking for sign-in manager, which is right here.
Nice.
So you can find these things. And I think the reason why we're opening up with this is to say, trying to help give everybody watching the tools and also explain how is it that we're learning what really happens. It's not that there isn't documentation, because there is. You know, I can come and say, I can say Blazor identity. And the first place you get to is right in the docs. ASP.NET Core Blazor Authentication and Authorization. And I think what you're going to see is we're essentially going through this, except we're just not doing it. We're just not doing it by reading it, but we're starting off at the top by saying, hey, you know, there's different ways to do this. They talk about how there's client and server side. Your security scenarios differ. So, you know, there's a lot to go through. And that's kind of what we're working through, except that for me, because I can't help it, I'm saying, okay, so if I go all the way back to the code and the code says, let's ask the sign-in manager for external authentication schemes, the first thing that goes through my head is, well, how does it know? And it's not so much because I want to change the code or own the code. It's because I want to know, what is it that I do to affect that? And why is that important? Because once I take the step, and you know, maybe this isn't totally true. Oh, did I actually stop the project? I did. Okay, so I got to fire it up again. Once I take the step of starting to eliminate all the stuff I don't need, what happens when either A, I need it, or B, I say, hold on, I want to work through this page. Hold on, I just want to see the login page here. Oh, it's thinking. Why is it thinking? Oh, I know why it's thinking. Because I have a breakpoint. And actually, I clicked that a couple times. So it's sitting here going, okay. Once I say to myself, now I want this to be my page, and I start deleting stuff, I kind of have to know what the right way is for this to work correctly. I'm not going to try and tell everybody here that you have to dive in as far as we are. Maybe it'll be comforting just to see, okay, well, I saw what they did. I don't really need to dive in. That's perfectly fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Sure.
But that's kind of the point, is that we're trying to dive in so that you can see what's really going on. So let's see.
Yeah, because like any wizard type functionality, right? Because that's kind of what that is, right? It's saying you want identity included in your project. Here, I'll give you all this stuff. You kind of need to know what's going on under the covers, right? Because I'm sure, you know, you're going to want to get rid of the things you're not using as part of your project if you're using an external identity provider. So knowing all of this is kind of important.
Right. I'm trying to see if I can get Azure Data Studio running. I do have it running. So here it is. And the interesting thing, though, is I think we've done this a couple times before, because I have definitely not done any entity framework migrations yet. And yet I have these. I'm going to dump these databases. I actually don't need them. Do I mind taking a survey? Well, maybe not right now.
Let's complete that on air. That'd be fun.
Oh, do I want to restart Azure Data Studio? Maybe not right now. Okay, so because the next step is that, what if we go ahead and try to log in? Mm-hmm. If I try to register a new user, then and again, I don't actually need that right now. Then what happens is it says, well, let's register a new account. I don't think this is going to work, because I believe the problem is going to be, let's see, PDPS. Problem is going to be, it should not work here. It should say, I'm trying to remember what the requirements are, but we're about to find out. Yep. Okay, exactly. So here's what happens. This is, I wanted this to happen. So by default, like, you know, from the template, you are set up everything's working except that it says, hold on a second. They used, in order to store the authentication information, they're using EF Core.
Yeah.
And they're saying, but you didn't apply the first migration to create your database. So it blew up. Basically what they do is they go to see if they can open the database they expect. When they create your app, they use a GUID to differentiate it, just in case this isn't the first time you've called it Blazor App 1. Or what if I checked this in, I committed this, and then you check it out and you're like, but I have Blazor App 1 too, and it would all blow up.
Right.
So the idea is unique database. You can change this. This is not set in stone. They recognize that nobody ever created the schema for the default identity. And they're like, if you want, you can use Package Manager Console to update the database and apply the migration. I mean, you could update the database from Package Manager. You could do it using the .NET EF tool, which we have done before, or they're so helpful, we'll apply it for you. So you just click the button, and now they're like, give it another. I love it. Give it another try.
Right.
So let's go take a look at what's happened now that I've applied that migration. And sure enough, I have an identity database. Now, Here's the thing. Again, if you're watching all this and you're saying, but I don't want to use that database, this is not set in stone. And that's why it's so important to be able to take apart these components and do what you want. So let's back up to just the home page, and then we'll go to register again. And I'll go ahead and use our example and see if I can get a password that it likes, which I think it has to have a number, an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, and a symbol. I'm pretty sure that's what they want. So now that's registered. Okay. Now here's the second thing you have to do in your code. What you have to do. There's documentation here that says, here's how you configure an email sender if you want to do email confirmation. Another thing that you can turn off. But since you're probably exploring, you can click right here to confirm your account. So I say we need to go find this component, account register confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go find that in our code. Because remember, we own this code now. Register confirmation. And what happens? We have, if email confirmation link is not null, then they say, what you can do is you can go straight to this email confirmation link, which I think, where is this code? Here it is. Here's the code you really want. So I want to show this up here. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take this out. Very likely. You're going to have to replace it with your own message. But the second thing you have to do is you have to go to the code. You do have to come down here, and you now have to stop using the identity no-op email sender, which is a component that they give you. They give us this identity. I kept saying component. I'm sorry. If it's a class that they give you, and they basically say, okay, what you need to do, and they're trying to tell you, you need to go remove this else if, so that this code doesn't work anymore after you use a real implementation. I imagine you could also throw this code out.
Sure.
Like just delete it from your app. But, oh, look, I made the same mistake myself. So what happens is you, I've lost it. Let me go back to register confirmation. Is you will have to come to the register confirmation page component, and you will have to get rid of this. And you'll have to basically have your own implementation, which you can do. What you do is, let me see. I'm pretty sure that if I search for identity no-op email sender, we're going to see it. Here it is right here. So, okay, so we've already found in Program CS. This is what I wanted to show everybody. On line 38 in Program CS, there is an email sender interface that you implement. And when you implement it, you're going to give a real implementation that's not a no-op. Yep. That's what we're being asked to do. So for today, it's fine, though. So for today, I'm going to go ahead and click to confirm the account. It says, oh, you've confirmed. So now let me go back to auth required. And it's still, which makes sense. It's like, well, you're still not logged in. So, okay, fine. We're finally going to get there after all this. And and why don't you remember me? And oh, I see I got it wrong anyway. Okay, you are authenticated. Yay. And the only thing the auth required page does is tell us who we are. That's it.
Okay.
So the home page doesn't have anything. The counter page doesn't have anything. The weather page doesn't have anything. I kind of want to get to a place to where when you're logged in, we see that in, say, the upper right-hand corner. That's where I'd like to get to. So that means that every page is, even though you're allowed to use, what's going to happen is you're going to see that every page will actually be an authorized page in some respect.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that what we're going to say is if you're not authorized, you can see all of it. And if you are, then, oh, you can also see the upper right-hand corner. That's what really is going to happen in an authenticated component. But right now, they don't do that. They basically say, you've got the home page, the counter page, but auth is required here. I'm sorry, auth. Oh, that's interesting that it, did I accidentally log out? I'm not sure how I would have, because it, even though I said remember me, it didn't remember me. I don't really want to save this password. Okay. I think I can come. Yeah, I'm authenticated. It might. Oh, you know what I did is I think I might have clicked log out when I was running through here. I might have done that.
Oh, all right.
I might have done that. I might have been like, ha, da, 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 da. Somebody can tell us in the comments. This is now the manage your account page on this particular app. And these are all those other components we were looking at earlier.
Nice.
Manage your email, manage your password, manage two-factor, manage personal data. So there's a lot of code that you've been handed. You've also been handed this database schema, and it should already have me in here now. Now, if I go ahead and say select top 100, here it is. There we go. Password hash is there, security is there, it's all there. So, oh, phone number, I didn't put in a phone number. So I suppose if I head back and I say personal data, or no, profile. Oh, here we go, phone number. All right. And we'll save that. Profile's been updated. Now nice. I just want to see it. I'll run this again. And there we go. So you have like you have the start of what you can use. You have a schema, but it doesn't mean you have to stick with it. We can go into Program CS and we can start pulling stuff out. We can say, I don't want to use SQL Server, or let's see, where is it? For Identity Core, I don't even want the entity framework stores. Maybe I want something else. So there's a lot here. After I add Identity Core, we can add roles that we want to be authenticated, different endpoint. There's all kinds of extension methods here. I can add a custom password validator. There's a lot.
Or other properties on that profile, the settings that you're keeping, right?
Yeah, there's a lot that we certainly will have to cover in future shows. But by default, you get an entity framework store, sign-in manager, and then the default token providers, which just means that they have a default plan in place for how they're going to handle access tokens, refresh tokens, whatever you use to generate password, emails, all those different things. So then the trick becomes, do you dive into this code to figure out what it's doing? Because maybe I want to change this.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't want the default email provider. I don't want the default phone provider. So, there's definitely some work to do there. We also, just to see the difference, let's see what's in the client. So the counter component, the auth component, is a client component. So this is what's interesting. All of the stuff we've been doing so far has been on the server level. And that actually makes sense because you can't authenticate anybody with a client component.
Okay.
There has to be a callback to a server, because when you think about it, just code running on the client, like how could I possibly validate your password unless I do something really dangerous, like send it down in the WebAssembly or something? So even though the auth required page, the page that requires auth, is a component that will run in WebAssembly, it still requires server components to get logged in. So that's kind of a lesson for even if you embark on making massive changes to this code you've been given or write some of your own, there's no scenario I can think of, and I'd love to hear what people think, where that can't be server side. I'm going to throw that stake in the ground with 15 minutes to go. And we're just going to live with that, I think.
So, and I have to do some exploring on this, but the one thought that comes into mind when you say that is a device authentication. So something like Windows Auth, which uses, either a PIN or a thumbprint reader or something on the machine that's stored on the TPM chip to say you are who you say you are. And I'm pretty sure they were hooks for applications to be able to take advantage of that authentication hook to get the person who signed into the machine. I could be wrong on that. I need to kind of research that a little bit, but that's one of the, I guess, an edge case in this case where you've got the thing on the client. Can we take advantage of that?
The other thing that I was just thinking of is, so the components that you've been given, the sample setup that you've been given, which is just as important as anything, you've been given a sample setup where your application is going to have its own login accounts, its own emails, its own passwords, and also maybe some external auth. In order to manage all of that here, that's got to end up somewhere, some data store. It doesn't have to be SQL Server, but let's say it is. So at that point, there has to be a call to a server side, something that goes and checks your database. You're not going to hand the keys to that to client code. But now let's say you aren't using any authentication like that. What if you want to use like an Azure B2C, an Auth0?
Yeah.
Maybe in that case, you could write a client component. Maybe it might be interesting to try a client component that is able to communicate. What I don't know about, what I'm concerned about is secrets that that client component might have to have in order, but I don't know. That would be an interesting implementation. And it might be something that would be worthwhile doing, because that way it helps us, once again, not feel trapped by what comes in the box.
Right.
As a last thing to do, because again, we mostly just explored today, and I hope that people watching get a sense of like, okay, I'm less afraid. Maybe I'm not afraid at all now, because it looks like I can navigate around. I can see what the code does, but just demystify some of what's happening. I tried a different tactic. I created a new Blazor web app, and this time it'll be app 2.
Okay.
And this time I said no sample pages. But I do want authentication, and I want no interactivity, because I was curious, how does the template handle this? I just wanted to know. So when you click create on this one, I thought this was interesting. First, I'm just going to run it. We're not even going to look at code. Not yet. And you get this. We haven't done a lot of time. We haven't spent a lot of time making templates with no sample pages.
Right.
But when you do, you get that. And that's it. So now let's go take a look at what code were we given. Well, we are still given an account section. We're still given a pages section. It only has one component, home. It has the error component, which is used by the framework. And
but
here
no
it
shared
is.
Section.
Yeah, the shared section is actually, it's all an account. So we still have all the account stuff. We still have all of this. This is all still here and it's ready to be worked through. But so then you say, okay, well, hold on. None of the routes are set up. There isn't a page with the auth, with an authorized view that's redirecting. So I think we can see 850. We should be able to add that. So let's go take a look at what they did in auth.razor. So in auth.razor, in the first project that we made today, it's actually a very simple page. It's simply saying it requires you to be authorized to get in here. No matter what, you're going to see the auth attribute. And if you can actually get into this page, then you're going to see you are authenticated. And then they go and they ask, they basically say, so what's this user identity's name? So we can just show it to them. Mm-hmm. So easy enough. Let's take this component and bring it over. And we will add a Razor component very quickly. And we'll call it the same exact thing. And we will use the same exact code, but we need a route. So just so that it's not magical to everybody, let's go look at routes.razor. No, I'm sorry. That wasn't what I really wanted. Oh, I'm in the client app. That's why. I want, it's not app. Actually, no, I guess it does have to be on the client side, doesn't it? I want the nav menu. I need to route. Maybe I don't have to route it because there's no menu. Yeah, actually, I don't have to route it. You know what? This is too long using the sample project. The routes, this whole nav menu was what we used so that we could click. Well, we don't have that ability. Right. But it is routed. It is routed because I have the page directive there.
Yes.
So
exactly.
I spent too much time using the other one. So let's see if I'm wrong. Now we're gonna find out. So if I just do auth, okay, I got redirected.
Yeah, but that's what you expect, right?
That's what you expect. You get redirected to a very plain looking page because once again, we have no sample pages. We have no CSS. You might actually like this as a starting point. When you're saying, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to do our app now. Using this as your starting point code might be less distracting, even though it's just visual. The code over here hasn't changed all that much, except that it still has Bootstrap classes in it. You may or may not like that. You may still want to strip all those out. And I get that. I think it would have been interesting, perhaps, if there was a way to have the template and strip out the styling as well. So all the functionality still works, but it's really bare bones. And
yeah,
the reason for that is just either it's your starting point or it just takes all the distraction out of the way and you can really focus on what the code's doing.
Yep. You know, people saying, should the button be blue?
Yeah. But you can see this code looks the same. This is still the same login page. It's still asking if you've configured an external login.
Yep.
Have you not? And so that all still works the same way. So we didn't get too far into changing this code. Just to give people a preview of what I think we want to do, we definitely want to configure an external auth provider. I personally, at this point, don't see a need for database-based logins. So we could work on stripping that out. That doesn't mean that you watching don't want that. But what it might do is at least say like, oh, I'm not stuck with this. You know, I can make changes.
That's the important thing to consider or keep in mind.
Yeah. And then there's a couple other things that I'd like to do where we didn't get to look at these very much at all. The sign-in manager, the redirect manager, is that these components are what you need to inject into your pages so that you can start asking questions about who is logged in, or control the sign-in. For example, when somebody logs in, you want to control. You might want to control that sign in. You might want to examine if you're using a product, a claims-based product. Maybe you want to examine the claims and then decide what roles they go in. What are their permissions? What is the policy for that particular user that's activated? And then you could have policy-based access control throughout your app instead of relying so directly on roles and claims. There are a lot of different ways to do things: role-based security, claims-based authorization, policy-based authorization, where you kind of decide for yourself based on information that you have about the user. So one thing that I think we'll do next time is we can actually throw all this away and start writing by hand the very simplest of logins capability. That's a total hack job. Like, it's basically saying, well, if the user is Rich and the password is Ross, then it must be Rich Ross. Like, you would never ship this code.
Right.
But at least it lets you say, okay, I've stripped away all the rest. Now I can see how authentication works.
Okay.
So I think that's something we can do, and we can do it in Blazor.
Yeah. I think it'll be fun.
Yeah. So hopefully, let's see. I got distracted for a little bit, and I missed a great question here. Scaffolding. So we got a question. What about scaffolding in Razor files? That's a great question.
Yep.
So this tells me that that user, and I'm just going to guess here, that you've used Blazor and .NET 7, and then you basically said, I want identity, and all the identities showed up in Razor pages. And then what happened in that case was you would look around saying, like, well, where's the actual page? Where's the actual page? And there was UI in Visual Studio and elsewhere where you would click and scaffold the page. You would say, hey, I need the login page now. I'm going to change it. And it would come up, and now you could change it. That's not what the template, that was actually really the whole point of what we did today, right? Is that's not what happened in Blazor. Instead, when you pick individual accounts, this code here is part of your template now. This is essentially all the scaffolding from before. Here's the log. This is the login page. This is the register page. This is the register confirmation page. Here's somebody's locked out. They're an invalid user. This stuff was all stuff that you would scaffold one by one in the old model, in the .NET 7 model, because Blazor didn't have that built in. These were Razor pages that you were scaffolding. Now, I don't want to say that it's built in. Like, it's really hard for me to decide how I want to kind of present it. It's your code, but you know what? It was your code before, even in the scaffolding system, because once you scaffolded it, now it's in your project, and now you got to work with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's still in there. It's just done in a more Blazor friendly way, or Blazor componentized way.
Right. Now, instead of having to use a second ASP.NET framework, the Razor Pages framework, to handle all your identity, it's all Blazor now. A lot of support code that yes, we're gonna go through the support code. Shared components that help you. Some of them you may be able to pick up and use with not a whole lot of changes, but some of them you're going to say, hey, I got to match my look and feel. That's really not that different, all that different than it was before. It's just that instead of you having to go pick the pages out to scaffold, it's here you go. And then go from there. But you know, if you really, really got good at this stuff, you actually could build it all from scratch. So I don't know.
Yep.
Not that I'm saying I want to do that, but I do think we should explore it a little bit. So in any case, it's almost 9. That is a great question. I really appreciate you joining us and asking that question. Thank you so much, because it really did bring up that point. We got it working. The template basically did it for us. And I think next time we're going to say, okay, let's start seeing what we can do backing away from the templates. It's going to be an interesting journey. So
yeah, over many shows. It'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's just about time for stand up, right? So that means we both got to go.
Yeah.
And hopefully you all have a great day watching. Please absolutely leave us some comments. Don't hesitate to like and subscribe on YouTube. And wherever you are watching, thank you for joining us. And we'll see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.